We're going to start in just a couple minutes. My laptop really doesn't seem to respect my pace of life. And so it's taking a minute. I'm super salty because the first Chromebook I bought was $170, and I bought it back in 2014. And it lasted lasted until this year. So what, 6-7 years? And this one I bought this year, and it seems to be dying already. All right, I think that's enough to get started. Let me double check the stream. Look at that. Hello, Gianna. Yes, it is perfectly fine to watch the 9 a.m. stream. I teach the same lesson twice in the same morning, so they are relatively interchangeable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Sick. Graham, I'm ordering either or on Amazon right now. It feels apt, actually, because I feel like today we're talking about the kind of collision between like a finite human body and the expansiveness of a large system like nature. So it feels, oh, Connor, thank you for putting your name in the chat. So it feels like the right thing to think about today. Okay, so first, so this is the book about nature, right? My favorite thing. And I said on Wednesday that I think nature is like the one true subject. And in some ways that's true. But I think you could probably say that a lot of different things are the one true subject and still get away with it, right? And I'm going to do that today as well. Because I feel like another one true subject is the self. And that there's no way around it. There's no way outside of it. And so I've brought in a couple readings in order to help us work with this. Because I don't think it's just like I think some people consider it to be a tragedy, but I think that it's just something we can get a lot of mileage out of exploring. So I've got two poems today. They're both called Passage, and they're both by Margaret Gibson. They're by Margaret Gibson. She writes lots of poems about nature, and she wrote a book of poems about nature, and in it there were lots of poems called Passage, sort of strung throughout the whole thing. And these are two of those. All right, Passage. And then a bird flew into my body and nested in the cuff of my shoulder. This is the mystery of pain. It can sing. I hear the wind differently now. I breathe, and my ribs are the cirrus of clouds. There's a river in my wrist. Daily I practice eclipse, although ordinary loss will do. At night I ripen beneath a hush of stars. That's the first one. Second one, also called Passage. Once in sunlight, I pinned to the clothesline a cotton sheet, a plane of light sheer as the mind of God, before we imagined that mind creased by a single word. With my hand, I smoothed any rivel, any suggestion of pleat or furrow. Whatever it was I wanted from that moment, I can't say. It failed to edify, nor did I bow. And yet the memory holds, and there is a joy that recurs in me, much as the scent of summer abides in air-dried sheets I unfold long after, lying down in them as one might in a meadow, as one might with a lover, as one might court the infinite, as long as that takes. That's the line. That's my favorite line. One might court the infinite as long as it takes. I feel like that's what we're going to do today, right? How long does it take to court the infinite? Your whole life. You're never going to stop. You're never going to get there, but it's going to be fun while you do it. So the reason I love these two poems and the reason I bring them in today is because Margaret Gibson seems to understand this weird conundrum that exists between the finite, scrutable, limited human body and the expansiveness of the world or universe. And the problem that we, material, literal people, try to understand, when we try to understand like the namelessness of consciousness, the namelessness of suffering, the namelessness of everything, really. Language is a wonderful invention, and it gets a lot of shit done. And then every now and then we turn around and think, well, all this stuff existed before language, and none of it is inherently meaningful, which means that language is like this other thing. And it's a weird problem to run into, right? And language is one of our best ways to sort of close the gap, but there is distance between language and perception, and then there's even more distance between perception and reality, right? And I think in some instances sometimes we kind of stop short and we throw up our hands and we call this tragic, but I don't think it really is. It's just what is, right? And so the poem isn't just about nature, it's about a person's experience of nature and about the grandeur of an idea like spirituality, but also about the reality and mundanity of a person trying to reach for it. This is also why I asked you to read Pleasure Boating in Lituya Bay today. One of the things I think that makes that story infinitely readable is the way that the narrator can't just say what he's so afraid of. And I think like if he was able to say what he was afraid of in like 2 or 3 sentences, there wouldn't be a story. But instead, this narrator is like getting a secret vasectomy and he's crying after having sex with his wife and he's obsessing about the tsunami in Alaska. Like he can't quite pull all of these things together in order to describe his fear, which seems to be about having children, right? But you can sense as a reader that it's there. And that unbridgeable distance, I think Jim Shepard gets enormous mileage out of his character talking around and around his problems and terrors. And if you liked this story, go pick up Jim Shepard's 2 books of short stories, Like You'd Understand Anyway, and You Think That's Bad, because it's chock full of narrators who like desperately can't say this one thing and don't know how to say this one thing, and then use all these other ways to think about it and talk about it. Jim Shepard is also an obsessive researcher, and so his stories are always set in like, the first Australian explorers exploring the outback or some shit like that, or the first people in space. He loves doing stuff like that too. And I was going to read the first couple of paragraphs of the story to demonstrate this, but unfortunately my computer's really not agreeing with me right now. I think I might just have to bite the bullet and buy a new one. I don't want to just spend another $180 and have it last a year, so it's a conundrum. I don't know. Also, RIT's equipment rentals, they're overtaxed right now, and I won't be able to get one right away. But now I'm quibbling. So Wednesday, I kind of went off a little about how everything within our possible scope of description is encompassed by the natural world, which I believe. And I even talked about how when we cast stones outward, like if we write about alien planets and alien problems, we're still chained to our one point of reference, which is the natural world. And today, I want to talk about another one of those limiting factors, because I think there's a lot more than one limiting factor. And I think it's really useful to demarcate the limits of our perception. Like even on Wednesday, I think one of the things I was doing when I was talking about the natural world's totality was I was talking about the limits of what we can and cannot see and depict. You know, it's weird to think about how there's this whole universe, this huge universe, and the only point of reference we have is this tiny little mote on it, right? And we can gesture toward the universe, we can look at it, we can think about it, but we're still stuck to this little ball, right? And I think in some ways that these limits are all that we have. And so the ball is going to become a metaphor in a sec for something else, for a different one. Like think about, does anybody watch The Truman Show anymore? Has anybody ever seen The Truman Show? I'm seeing a couple enthusiastic. Yes, please go watch The Truman Show. It's such a good movie. But there's this moment in The Truman Show where his whole life he's on a reality show and he doesn't know it. That's like the basic gist. Sorry if I just spoiled that for you, but you know, you have the internet. Like but he starts to figure it out, and he takes a boat out into the ocean, and then he realizes that the sky is actually a wall that's been painted to look like the sky, right? And he like bumps his boat up against it. Think about how much bigger his world gets in that moment when he realizes that the sky is actually a painted wall. It doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger because he realizes that he incorporates a new truth. He's like, oh shit. And then there's a door in it, right? And he goes through the door, right? It's a beautiful moment. And so when we encounter, my point is that when we encounter these limits, they're not like, it's not like sad to have limits. When we encounter them, they're interesting, right? Tennis is played on a court. You need these limits in order to play within them. So what limit here am I talking about exactly? The name of today's lesson is you are always the one in nature. The limit is self. I'm talking about the fact that when you interact with nature, you are always the one interacting with it. The lens is always you. You can't perceive anything outside this field of color and shadow that's kind of stuck to your front, right? Your thoughts and feelings will never really leave this like dark, wet box that's chilling up here on your neck. And before you go thinking that that's like dark or weird, I would like to remind you that your good-bad scale also exists within this system, and you can't exist outside of that either, which means that you can't judge this fact as good or bad. It comes before your feelings of good or bad. It encompasses those too. To judge, the point is, this isn't the point, now I'm on a tangent, but to judge consciousness as good or bad would be like trying to zero the scale while you're standing on it. You can't get a true reading. And so it only is, and we're incapable of judging it. Okay, I'm gonna come down out of the class for a second. Because that's kind of my tangent, but what does it mean for writing? It means that these problems, these weird paradoxes that the world presents us with and presents our consciousness with, if you're looking, you can find these manifesting everywhere in everyday questions and struggles and interactions, and that our perception of things like beauty and heroism pretty much depend on these limitations. It means that in your writing, the collision of the grand and the mundane is one of the best ways to generate something interesting or to notice and explore compelling problems. So now, with all of this in mind, we're going to try some writing. So get your notebooks out. And let me double check the stream. Okay, cool. So like we've done before, first, we're going to pick a natural place and put ourselves there. Again, try to pick one that you haven't chosen before in here. And I'm going to ask you to describe it for a while, bringing in all the details that you can. And I'm going to ask you to bring in that white space as well. Oh, I totally forgot to do white space last time and just wrote it like a journal entry. Okay, cool. I'm glad I get a retry. But maybe unlike before, try to keep your descriptions rooted in the first person, as in try to foreground the self that is looking out at the forest or desert or whatever. So I see the mesa stretching out before me, etc. Kind of like that poem about lying in a hammock at William Duffy's farm. That first person perspective is going to be important in the next part. So we're going to do this for 6 minutes. About a minute left. Okay. So now that you've described for a while, I want you to keep describing. We're going to do this for another 4 minutes, but this time, try to let those details about the place lead you into a statement that expresses the mood. So maybe you notice the grand allegro rhythms of the river in your scene, or the golden diagonal light leads you to think about like a sense of peace. I've got like a really intimidating sort of Everest type environment going on here. So my mood is definitely like very severe and full of risk. Try to lock on to your mood and then express it. And if you have to read over your descriptions in order to do so, I invite you to do so. We're going to do this for 4 minutes, so this is slightly quicker. Go. About 20 seconds left. Okay. Now, I want you to carry this mood inward. And what I mean by this is think now about with your mood in mind, think now about a problem that's been on your mind for a while, or a worry that you have, or a lesson that you can sense forming on the edge of your knowledge. Write about this problem or discovery. And don't struggle too hard, and you can feel free to go straight for the problem. Don't struggle too hard to accommodate it with the setting. Those things are already implicated by being together in the same document, in the same train of thought. But ruminate on this problem or sense or feeling for a while. And we're going to do this for 7 minutes. About a minute left. All right, wrap up your sentence. Okay. So now, finally, go back to some of the details of your natural setting in which you put yourself. Some of the details that you featured in the first step. And this time, I want you to find something new about that detail, about those details. And in order to bring yourself back, feel free to even do this very directly, like, I keep coming back to the sight, sound, or smell of blank. That's fine. And also, if you find yourself expanding or trailing away from that detail and into other things about the setting, feel free to do so. You've got time. We're going to do this for 7 minutes. And as you write, as you come back to these details, try to notice. Now that you have let the natural world sort of take you into your own thoughts and emotions, what can you notice about the featured natural world that maybe you didn't the first time you encountered or envisioned it? Or rather, how has your place in the natural world changed as a result of the trip it invited you to take into your own thoughts? Or how has the natural world itself changed as a result of what you've seen internally? 7 minutes, go. Okay. You can wrap up your sentence. I would love to discuss a little, because I've thrown a lot at you in the last couple of days. And I think part of my hope for these couple exercises about nature was to illustrate the weirdness of the relationship between, at its core, really, the relationship between consciousness and the world, like the strangeness of trying to be this small finite body looking at such an expansive thing, a thing as expansive as the globe, and then also even as the thing as expansive as oneself, truly. Like, it's tough. And I think part of why I like rooting these things in the natural world is because in the past, when I've taught lessons like this, I run into sort of grumpy empiricists, some kid raises his hand and he's like, well, I trust in my perceptions and I trust in what's literal, and my dad's Christian and I'm super atheist. So I'm like, fine, that's fine. But I find that I've spent my time as a militant atheist. Like, I paid those dues, but I have found that trusting in my own perception still leads me to very, very weird places, right? And I'm going to give you a weird example, but think about a ceiling fan for a second. You turn a ceiling fan on, instantaneously, your brain is like, I'm just going to give you a circle, dog. Like, I'm not trying to render those blades for you anymore. Like, the second you turn the fan on, your brain's like, nope, we're not doing that, right? So to trust in one's own perception is fine, but I think that it has limits that we butt up against a lot more often than we think that we do. And that those limits don't have to be, I think there was a time when I believed that those limits were like scary or tragic or horrifying, right? And in some ways we are talking about horror, this encounter with the unknown. But I don't think it has to be any of those things necessarily. So with all of that in mind, I super want to hear from you about this writing exercise, but also about the story, Pleasure Boating in Lituya Bay, which is honestly just one of my absolute favorites, and about the exercise yesterday, because we didn't get to talk very much earlier this week either. So what did y'all think about it? What did you love or hate? What was easy? What was natural? What was difficult? What was interesting? All right. If not, oh, Haley, hit me.
I mean, it's not like that crazy, but like the stuff we did today, like I find it like difficult for me to put the problem that I chose to write about into like the place I chose.
Mm-hmm.
Because the place I was talking about was like this one farm when I went to like Cuba. That was like really like wow, this is beautiful. But then like the problem that I'm thinking about a lot is like what's the role of art anymore in like this visual culture?
Great problem.
Like what's the point of a realistic painting when you just take a photo, but what's the point of a photo when everyone can be a photographer and like all that stuff? And then like even if there's this like beautiful place, like I don't know. And then it got more to like what's the point of being an artist, which I think about a lot because fine art major.
It's a problem that we all have to reckon with, yeah, for sure.
But yeah,
I like it. And I think that, so did you find any success in connecting? You said you had some trouble. Did you find any success in connecting that problem with that place?
the only like thing was just like if I was like to make art based off of this place, like,
Right.
it's because of the world we live in. Like this place is just kind of like would just be another post on Instagram thing. But like, when you're there, it's like wow. But then like I couldn't like picture seeing like this online and being like cool.
Like moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah, at best, right? No, that's fair. That's fair. We live in a really strange and commodified world in that sense. Thank you. Graham.
Yeah, so one of my favorite movies, Howl's Moving Castle.
Love that movie.
And so I showed like the scene where it's like the cottage and like the field with the mountain or whatever. And so I pictured myself like the grass, and then inside the cottage I have like a kettle going
Mm-hmm.
to eat, and so I started using that to like signify like my problems that I have to deal with, even though I want to be lying outside in the grass.
I dig. Okay. And you felt like it worked.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. An image of distress, an image of distress in a way, an image of alarm, an image of like deal with me. I found an interesting relationship between my my wondering and my setting as well, because I found that like I said, I did this. I'm big into mountaineering, and so I did this like sort of mountaineering situation where there's like a mile tall glacier in front of me and stuff. And then when the problem came up, I was like, man, I feel like a lot more like a constellation of points than a self. Like I don't really know how to proceed with, and it felt so inappropriate to the situation that it almost felt more distressing, where I felt like I have to climb this mountain. I don't even know that I feel like a body. Like it was a very interesting sort of collision, a sort of mismatch of problem and location. And it led to a heightened sort of sense of alarm, kind of like what you're talking about. There was this thing that I had to deal with, and it became a symbol for having to reckon mentally with new problems and lessons. All right, thank you. We're close to time, so I'm going to let us go. We have class Monday? Today's Friday, right? So I wish you all an excellent weekend, and I will see you soon. Thanks for playing.